Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Shane Beamer, South Carolina, working their way through spring practice. And I largely, view spring practice as an opportunity to get answers about a football team. Where, look, every single program across the country, you're going to have questions about heading into 2025. You certainly have some questions about South Carolina. Spring practice gives us that ability to try to figure out, all right, what questions about this roster are we seeing answers kind of, pop up during spring practice? And what questions do we still have that, 5 years ago you didn't have this opportunity, but now you kind of have the opportunity to say, all right, we went through spring practice. We still have question marks about this position group. Well, you have that spring transfer portal window to go out and try to answer some of those questions before you have to kick off in the fall. What positions do we feel good about? What positions still need to be addressed in the transfer portal? That's what I want to get into. Kind of a, overarching conversation. We've talked some nitty-gritty conversations about South Carolina, offensive line rotation, what the rotation is going to look like in the secondary. Want to take a little bit more of a bird's eye view approach. Talk about the roster, talk about the things we like a lot heading into 2025, and talk about some questions that still need to get answered. Before we get into it, as always, to the South Carolina fans, y'all let it fly in the comment section. We say this every time we talk spring ball. The fans that are engaged in spring practice, the fans that are listening to this, y'all live and breathe this program. There ain't no question about that. I'm sure many of y'all, have a spring portal plan that you would like to see South Carolina go out and execute. Would love to hear the positions that you would like to see South Carolina go out and address in the spring transfer portal window. I'll give you some of mine as well. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. The support from the South Carolina fans has been overwhelming. Appreciate you guys. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, we'll kind of just start at the top. You love what you're hearing from Lenora Sellers. And the thing with Lenora Sellers was that there's no physical development that needs to take place. And then one of the things that frustrates me the most is I think people just assume because Lenora Sellers is the best athlete at the quarterback position, people question his arm talent, his accuracy. Look, he pushes the ball down the field better than anybody else in the country. Ain't nobody questioning the arm strength, but the accuracy. I look at the numbers. I go back and watch some games in 2024 when Lenore Sellers was clean last year, which didn't happen very often because that offensive line struggled early in 2024. But when Lenore Sellers was giving adequate protection, he had a 71% completion percentage when he was kept clean in the pocket. I think the accuracy concerns that people present about Lenore Sellers really overblown. This kid we know he has a big arm, but I think he's a much more talented thrower of the football than a lot of people give him credit. I think the development you want to see Lenore Sellers take going into year two as a starter here is just between the ears. Like going through our progressions a little bit quicker, knowing where our answers are on particular plays. You're hearing all the right things from Lenore Sellers taking that step between the years. And if he does that, you're looking at one of the best quarterbacks in the country, running back position. It ain't a problem if Rasul Faison gets his waiver, which it sounds like South Carolina expects to happen. There's buzz around the program that his impact's going to be greater than it was with Rocket Sanders last year. That's high expectations, but that's kind of what you're hearing about Rasul Faison. This is not only a true running back one. This could be one of those difference makers at the running back position that would really allow this South Carolina offense, specifically in the rushing attack, to be elite. Whenever you have Lenore Sellers at quarterback, you're going to have an easier time running the football. This offensive line ain't nobody talking about. Stock is up on this offensive line. I think they found that right recipe in terms of what their 5-man rotation is. I think it's what you see on the screen here. Sri Babaleta kicking in the guard, Trevon Baugh taking that step going into year 3 within the program. This rushing attack sounds like it could be elite. And if you get Rasul Faison's waiver, I think it's going to be one of the better rushing attacks you see in the country. And I think the last question mark I think a lot of us had with South Carolina going into spring ball, are these wide receivers good enough? Once again, hearing all the right things. Nick Harbor focusing on football, potentially true wide receiver one. Not only for South Carolina, but like a legitimate top-end wide receiver one in the SEC. And then you're hearing all the right things about these true freshmen that have come in. I mean, it's all of them, right? Malik Clark at times, Brian Rowe, Jaden Sellers getting a lot of buzz as well, and it ain't just because of his last name. You don't need every single true freshman to step up in the wide receiver room, but I think it's fair to say that two or three of them certainly will. And if you get that, the pass catcher room should be very good for South Carolina in 2025, especially if you get the necessary development from a guy like Nick Harbor going into year 3 and a guy like Mazio Bennett going into year 2. On the offensive side of the football, I truly think this unit can be not just good, but kind of borderline elite going into 2025 because you have the quarterback. I think you have the offensive line. I think you'll have the rushing attack. Pass catches, you love what you're hearing. They're checking off every box that you want to see on the offensive side of the football. Now, I think where the questions start to come in is on the defensive side of the football, specifically in the middle of the defensive line. And what I want to be very clear about is I don't think the pass rush is going to be a problem for South Carolina. Whenever you have a guy like Dylan Stewart, it probably ain't going to be a problem. But you're hearing some good things from a guy like Brian Thomas. You're hearing some good things about a guy like Desmond Yu. Maybe a little bit more thin in the edge room than you would want because you have Wendell Gregory who hit the transfer portal. Jalen Brown's out for the rest of spring with a lower body injury. So you only have not as many bona fide scholarship names as you're probably looking for in that edge room, but you do have some. It's a lot of blue chippers. Dylan Stewart, Desmond Yu, Jalen Brown. Those are blue chip talent that could be really good in 2025. The pass rush, I think, should be okay. I think the question mark is: are we going to be good enough against the run, specifically in the middle of the defensive line? And the feedback that you're hearing is it's probably not good enough right now. And this is probably the position where you look at and say, if South Carolina can address this the right way in the spring transfer portal window, which is going to be hard to do because there's a lot of programs that are looking for big bodies on the middle of the defensive line that can play in the SEC. But I think what helps South Carolina is there's not a ton of desperation on this roster. Like outside of the interior defensive line, I don't think there are a lot of positions that South Carolina has to monkey around within the transfer portal, which allows them to allocate all the resources they have to that one position. Now, you're hearing good things about Xavier Hardy. He may be a year away. You're hearing good things about Gabriel Brown-Ladindi. You're hearing good things about Devontae Miles, who I didn't think was going to be good enough to play in the SEC. He might be a rotational guy. He ain't going to be a starter, but he could be a rotational guy that you can maybe rely on. You're probably wanting one to two names. And if you can do that, and there will be a couple of defensive linemen that I think hit the portal that can help South Carolina, this is where, look, we know that South Carolina will be a good team in 2025. There's just too many things that are really good about South Carolina for them not to be a good team. College football playoffs, being dangerous in the college football playoffs, this is where it comes in. South Carolina's offense is going to put up a lot of points. Teams will try to run the football. Keep Lenore Sellers off the field. You especially in the SEC, have to be able to hold up along the lines of scrimmage. That's probably the question you have about this football team. Now, on a more brighter note, it sounds like the linebacker room is less of a concern than we thought it was. That was another question that we had going into spring. You're hearing really good things about Fred Johnson. You're hearing really good things about the transfer and Justin Okoronkwo. Those are two guys. I think you look at those four linebackers in the two deep, Fred Johnson, Jaron Willis, Justin Okoronkwo, and Sean Murphy. You're even hearing good things about true freshman Donovan Darden. Those guys all looked apart in terms of SEC linebackers. It's kind of a stark difference between what you talk about the linebackers and the interior defensive line, where you're not really sure if you have SEC bodies up front. But at the linebacker room, you knew you had the physical specimens, you might say, to have quality linebacker play in the SEC. And it sounds like they are starting to become quality SEC linebackers. And so the linebacker position, I think the questions that we had about this unit are starting to maybe get melted away a little bit. And then in the secondary, it's positive vibes only. I mean, they got a lot of talent and a lot of versatile talent, which allows them to maybe try to play around with, hey, what's our best five look like? How can we maximize our secondary going into 2025? And you got Jalen Kilgore, who we know can play nickel at a high level, but could play safety at a high level too. Brandon Sissy could play boundary cornerback, could play nickel. You got some guys that you can move around to really maximize what this unit can be, the secondary should be good. If you answer the questions you have to answer on the defensive line, I don't see any glaring question marks, and that's kind of the conversation. What's the difference between a 8-4 team and a 10-2 team that's in the playoffs? To me, it's, are we as complete as possible? And there's one hole that we see in this team. If they can fill that hole in the spring transfer portal window or get the necessary development from a guy like Xavier Hardy or Gabriel Brown Ladindi, then you feel really good about this team. Very interested to see what South Carolina, how they kind of finish off spring practice and what they do in the portal. I think a lot of South Carolina fans will be joining me and saying, hey, we're big bodies that hit the transfer portal on the defensive line. We're going to be scrolling Twitter for looking for those bodies. We'll close it out there. Again, I think you're checking off a lot of boxes. You got maybe one more box we got to check off. And we're kind of ready to rock and roll in 2025. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.